Again. So, the theme of our panel is Nationalism, Identity and Environment, and the first speaker will be Alp Yücel, and he's going to present his speech he prepared together with Erkan Serçe, and he studied in the Middle East Technical University, and he completed his master's thesis there, and then he completed his PhD in history in Paris, and he's in the Aegean University, and he's a professor at the Economics Department, and he's the coordinator of the Mediterranean Academy, and he's working on the economic history and ownership relations. And Erkan Serçe completed his graduate and undergraduate studies, and he's now working in 9 Eylül University History Department, and he's interested in the modernization during the Ottoman period, economic institutions, and Ottoman printing industry, travelers and travel books. And the title of their speech is the following: The Condition of Working Classes in Izmir from the Great Depression of 1873 and 1896 to 1914. So we will talk about the Great Depression between the 1873 and 1896, and then we will talk about the condition of the working classes. So this is the discussion that we are going to do, and I will start. When we look at the economic history of Izmir, this is what we remember. Starting from the 17th century, Izmir has been an important port city in the East Mediterranean, and in the 19th century it is the largest export port in the Eastern Mediterranean, and so it became a city which breathes together with world capitalism, and agriculture, trade, industry and finance transformed in this period, and they centralized in Izmir, and there were infrastructure investments, railway, new neighborhoods were being established, and there was also demographic growth. And within this framework, we see that Izmir had common characteristics with other port cities in the Eastern Mediterranean. And when we look at the literature, we see that starting from the 17th century, this development has occurred, and mostly non-Muslims and Levantines were pioneering, or in other words, bourgeoisie was carrying out these economic activities, and the studies are mostly focused on these activities. But we want to look to the other side of the medallion, and we want to look at Izmir as a city of working classes, and together with, so when we say that Izmir was breathing with world capitalism, and what does capitalism mean? It means that there is an intensification, concentration of capital, and the labor is socialized, and of course the number of capitalists will be lower, and the number of workers will be higher. So we will be talking about a larger segment in terms of quantities. So we can talk about villagers working in agriculture, sharecroppers, workers, fishers, and workers in the vessels and mines and salt pools. So we will try to discuss a wide segment including all these workers. And Ethem Nejat wrote an article in 1919, and he used the proletariat term. He says that there is no Turkish equivalent for this term, and this is the definition he makes. And briefly, it can mean yemim cedid, rızkım cedid. So this means that this is a description of people waiting for their daily wage so that they can feed themselves the day after. And let's give us information about the period 1873 and 1896. So there was this Great Depression, and 1896 and 1940, this is the Belle Epoque. So these are the periods that we want to give. And the second period was in 1929. Also, it is discussed that in 2008 the third Great Depression occurred, and so this was a Great Depression in the capitalism history worldwide. We have steam engine became common, and the prices decreased, and real wages increased gradually. So why there was depression? Because the profit margins were reduced, and the raw material prices decreased, and there was capital export, and there was a recession, relative recession in the world market. And then there was Belle Epoque, and profit rates increased, and combustion engines came to the agenda, and there was imperialism, and real wages increased very gradually, and raw material prices also increased, and labor productivity increased, and the world market expanded quite rapidly. So when we look at neighboring countries, what happens in the Ottoman Empire and in Izmir, and of course, and in the US, the development of the industry brought lack of industrialization in other parts of the world, but with 1870s there is a weakening in non-industrialization, and we see that there is a gradual industrialization in the peripheral countries, and we see that together with the 1870s, with the Great Depression, a slow industrialization started with local capital, and with the 1890s foreign capital was used for industrialization. And when we look at the wages after the 1870s, and in line with the worldwide developments, we see a decline in the prices, and also an increase in the nominal prices, and of course this was increasing the real wages. The purchasing power has improved in this period. So there is a striking fact here. After 1908, the wages increased once more as a result of the social mobility, and this applied to the port cities. And let's skip these indexes now, and let me say the following. This situation of the Ottoman, when we compare it to the worldwide, what can we say about this? And Öznur and Pamuk wrote an article about it. So after the Industrial Revolution, the real urban wages in Europe increased, particularly after 1850, but in the Eastern Mediterranean geography, the increase was much slower compared to the increase in Europe. And Özmücür and Pamuk say this for the worldwide, but we can say it for the Mediterranean countries as well. Yes, there was an increase in the real wages, but compared to the other countries, we see that it's much lower. And what about main characteristics of labor market in Izmir? We see that migrant labor is quite prominent here, and so there is a relative high wage for Izmir. In Sakız, it is 6.2 kuruş, and it is 8.2 kuruş in Middle Lesbos, and in 11 kuruş in Izmir. It was 6.2 in Chios, and there was, according to newspaper, a Greek from Lesbos. He had painted, and he had a letter in his pocket, and he was inviting his father to Izmir, because in this letter he said that they could gain more by working less. So this was an attraction center. There was a pull factor, construction of the railway, construction of the air gas plant, and construction of the infrastructure created a pull factor, and there was a vivid labor market. And where does this migrant labor come? And islands play an important role, and hinterland of Izmir also plays an important role, and also people from the central Anatolia and from the eastern part of Anatolia also migrated to Izmir in this period. And on the other hand, particularly in 1878, migrants came from Balkans and Russia, and of course this migration has a seasonal dimension, and it may sometimes be temporary. And in 1871, the number of migrant workers was around 170,000. But it says, when we look at 1910, in Prizren and Kalkandere, the number of Albanians is around 5,000. And here we have to emphasize the following. This urban labor was based on seasonal and temporary workmanship. So because we are talking about an agriculture-based economy, during the harvest and export seasons, of course, the need for labor was larger, and so this is how the city was living. And in 1905, Cevat Sami writes the following. Between September and November, in 3 months, we see that import and exports increase, and thousands of people come to the city, and in order to work for this import and export, and we can resemble this mobility to the functioning of a large machine. So he says that labor market is more vivid in this period, and of course we don't know whether these migrants, temporary migrants, lost their properties in their village, or maybe they had some small land or some animals back in their villages, so that they would come to, as temporary workers when the season was high, and they were going back to their homeland to make their living. Actually, this also happens today. This process is also repeated today. And we can also say the following. And about the plants. So where does this labor work? Together with industrialization, we can quote the following from Hüseyin Rıfat. And starting from 1914, there are about 120 plants, and we cannot say that thousands of workers were working for these plants. So, but some of these plants were smaller, but the tobacco plant was quite large. And in 1890s, this this tobacco plant employed 400 to 500 workers. Other plants, other workshops generally employed a lower number of employees, because the economy was based on agriculture, the industry was based on agriculture. But there's something else which attracts our attention. In the second half of the 19th century, Izmir became a region where machines are manufactured, because railway was being constructed after 1857, and 40 workshops carrying out repairings and plants or machines appeared. Isigonis was quite important among them. I will just give Isigonis plant as an example. In 1872, it employed 60 to 70 workers, and its annual production included 11 steam engines and vessels, boilers of 12 different sizes. And so we see that there was a significant machine production there, and it employed 60 to 70 people in 1872. However, in 1892, the number of employees increased to 200. So there are two footnotes related to Isigonis plant. It had operations in the Western Anatolia, and also when we look at the hydraulic presses that are used in the islands or in the Western Anatolia, we see that this was manufactured by Isigonis, and Isigonis continued this activity in the 20th century, and one of the members of the Isigonis family was the designer of Mini Cooper. And we have limited number of information about the wages. You see it on the table, and for the urban and rural workers, we will look at the city only. There are nominal wages and real wages. We see that nominal wages are almost stable with 1870s, 10.5, 11, 12. So, however, when we look at the real wages in terms of purchasing power, we see there's an improvement here, because there's a decrease in the food prices. We have to underline this decrease. And after 1896, the process continued as is, and until 1908. And in this year, nominal wage remained the same, but there were high price increases. And as a result of these increases, the purchasing power was weakened, and therefore the urban worker wages decreased significantly. But then there was a leap again, significant leap again. And here, these were the wages. And what about the costs? We could find some of these cost figures when we see So there is another report. It was prepared in 1885. So it gives us the income of a family of 4. It says that they can even save some of this money. So this report was prepared by the U.S. consulate.
But yes, these are the figures. But when this is the figures, but we can also discuss the life standard. With the Industrial Revolution, the life standards of the workers, whether they were improved or whether this was a catastrophic experience. This is the discussion, and the most important figures of this discussion is Edward Palmer Thompson. And we should remember that text from the book. We should think about the quality as well. It's important. It is a difficulty to find statistical data to create an index. You also know that. And also the data here cannot include certain elements which are not measurable. What are those? For instance, from food products to houses to health, family life, leisure time, working discipline, education, playtime. These are difficult to take into consideration. So one side we have the qualities, on the other side we have the quantities. So for the second group, we need to look at the literature evidences, literature proofs. So by looking at the statistical averages, it is difficult to make assumptions. You need to look at the quality aspect. So the wages, although the wages increase, but the British labor class experiences as a catastrophe, he says. Here we should look at the data on the quality. There's an article written by Halit Ziya Uşaklıgil. He mentions the very unpleasant conditions of housing in this article. The housing areas and stores are very close to each other, and he talks about the difficulties in terms of hygiene and etc. There is a group of people, Jewish community he refers to here, who lives under very unpleasant conditions. They live in Jew quarters, and he refers to the hygienic conditions, the difficulties in relation to the hygienic conditions, and he says that we need to do something against that. And there's a striking passage here in Ahenk. They say that the police closes these quarters down because these are not available or possible to leave, but they are reopened afterwards. This is what we see in Izmir and Thessaloniki, especially for Jewish community. The residential units have a more composite structure. In Jewish families, we see 12 to 13 people living in one household, when compared to 4 to 5 people in other neighborhoods. So this data is important. The population density density is important. Poverty is a fact here. The statistics from 1918, those who are living in poverty, the labor class who's living in poverty, there are 641 single room, there are 106 Jewish rooms and 82 Greek rooms, and these rooms are not at very good quality. And from the Kadife Kale to the port area, a difficult way to follow in that route. The difficulties of these people's lives are explained in many articles, many texts. There are some strikes, there are some consequences and some gains as a result of the strikes in 1908. There is a group of people who is waiting ready to work for lower wages, the lunch break problems, the weekly holidays problems were mentioned. What happened in 1908 and this strike happened? Before 1908, in 1906 and 5, there are increases in the prices, especially for food products like meat. And so in terms of quantity, we see the infrastructure of the reform. On the other hand, we see that the regime of Abdülhamid brought this political framework for that as well as a data for the quality. The strikes and actions emerged in different forms as of 1908. Of course, the gains of rights is important and is reflected to the wages. There are some trials for organizations we can mention here. In short, what is the conclusion we can draw out here? In 1912-14, there was a conflict and separation. There was the economical and societal differences and rivalry between labor classes. There are local labor and immigrant labor forces. And there was economic differentiation in different ethnic groups. Another important effect is the boycott movement. This boycott movement and labor movement gained a nationalist nature. And of course, wars, rising nationalism, imperialism have influences. Let me finish by making a quote here. Maybe we should think about the Industrial Revolution. In the Britain example, the Irish migrants and the conflict between British and English and Irish labor groups, the general law for capitalist accumulation, and he concludes it's by saying that and sad fate comes and brothers kill each other. Thank you very much for listening to me.